ACS Fellows Project, 4th of April 2024, at Gary Trinder at the ACS Perth offices in Perth, WA. Thanks very much for joining us.
It's a pleasure.
Yeah, so let's kick off with an overview of your career. How did you get into IT?
Well, I think the thing to know here is that back in the 1960s, the world was very different.
Sure.
So I really got into ICT by default. At school, I was good at maths, but there were no school career officers or counsellors, and so going to university, I did pure mathematics.
Right.
For no other reason than I was good at it at school.
Yeah. Here in WA?
Over here in WA at University of WA. So I graduated with a Bachelor of Science in pure mathematics, and I think the last maths I used was the last exam I sat for.
Right. Yes.
So the options were really to get into, the logical extension that was to get into actuarial studies.
Right.
So I got recruited by National Mutual Life at the time, who had a program for people for actuarial studies to do 2 years in the Perth office and then go to Melbourne, and because actuarial studies then were remotely from University of Edinburgh or Glasgow or somewhere. So there was no actuarial studies in Australia.
Right. Okay.
This is how far back we're going.
Sure.
So I joined National Mutual Life. My girlfriend at the time, now my wife, was still studying.
Right.
So in those 2 years in Perth, I've got to do something. So I enrolled in a postgraduate diploma of numerical analysis and automatic computing, which was essentially an honours degree in maths plus an introduction, and it wasn't much more than introduction to computing, once again at UWA. And I guess I got hooked on it then. I thought, this maybe is a better option for me than more mathematics.
Yeah.
So I went to Melbourne for 2 years with them. At that time, there were no formal studies in IT.
Right.
The Commonwealth Government had their program in training, the PIT course, which was the main avenue for most people.
Yep.
I had been selected for that, but it didn't fit with where I wanted to be at that time.
Yep.
So National Mutual, the banks, the large organisations like BHP, all had their in-house training programs for people to get into IT, but they were all very specific and tailored for their needs rather than a generalised education in IT, if you like.
Yep.
So off I went to Melbourne. I did 2 years in Melbourne, and then circumstances brought me back to Perth in the IT game, but in the very early days.
Right.
I think what happened for me, and I guess for a lot of people of my era, was that computing was so new that the world for promotion was expanding in front of you.
Right.
It's almost like the universe. I mean, there were no IT managers when I joined.
Sure.
Okay, so the opportunities for promotion were great.
Yep.
I found early on that my technical skills probably wasn't where I wanted to be. So I very quickly, as best and fast as I could, got into IT management. But the opportunities were there.
Yeah.
All my colleagues that made the same, we're all first somewhere.
Right.
I was the first IT manager, was then the Public Works Department, others first manager at Main Roads, first manager here, first manager there. So the world sort of was at our feet. Circumstances are just purely of the era.
Yeah.
I guess never to be repeated again. So, so the landscape, as I said, was a very expanding environment. Learning was by experience. There was all the training was done either through vendor training or attendance at ACS conferences. The first ACS conference in WA, I think, was in about 1979.
Right.
And so it was those industry type training courses, conferences, were where you learnt.
Yeah.
Gradually, from the late 70s, early 80s, Curtin University, then the WA Institute of Technology, brought out the first degree course, and so people started to come through with 3 years training in a whole lot of ranges rather than just COBOL programming or whatever. So from from a career point of view, in those early days, you were either a programmer or an analyst.
Yep.
And an analyst was somebody who had previously been a programmer.
Right.
It was seen
Yep.
as a promotion. So we didn't have DBAs or any of that sort of stuff. So once again, the opportunity, as the industry grew, so the opportunities grew. I guess for me, the IT management led me to from IT management into consulting,
Right.
then into managing consulting businesses,
Yeah.
managing an R&D company,
Okay.
going to Sydney to set up a Perth office of a WA-based company in the 90s, and then back to Perth after that, running one of the first major outsourcing projects here with the Water Corporation.
Okay.
From then into into an IT consultancy business again. From then into academia, and the academics might be saying that, but I semi-retired into academia.
Yeah.
And spent 4 years teaching or setting up a course at Edith Cowan University in project management.
Right. Okay.
So I set that up and ran that for 4 years, and then circumstances were such that they needed a new Chief Information Officer, and they said, well, Gary, you've done this in the past, how would you like to do that? So that's where I finished up, and I retired from that role.
Yeah.
Looking back, I never spent more than 4 years in any one job.
Yeah.
I stayed more than 4 years with a company,
Right.
but never more than 4 years in a job.
Yeah.
And I think that was the nature of my era. That there were opportunities that you could go and change on a regular basis.
Right.
I'm not too sure the same opportunities exist today.
Yeah.
So I think if I look back, I got into IT by default. It was a tremendous career for me. I travelled a lot through the consulting. I think I've worked in almost every capital city in Australia and New Zealand, either in short-term work or long-term work. So it's been good for me. And as I say, I got there by default, but at the end, it worked out. It worked out well for me. I hate to think what it would have been like as an actuary.
Yeah.
I certainly probably would have been a dull man in a suit or something rather than that. So I think so. That's how I got into my career.
Yeah.
It's been at times. I think it is a young person's career. I remember when I decided to retire, I'd been to a Cisco conference in Melbourne.
All right. Yeah. The Cisco Live conferences.
Yeah.
Yeah.
As an invitation to all CIOs in WA. Anyway, the branch manager in WA took us all out for a meal, and I think I was, of all CIOs that were there, and I think I was the oldest by about 10 years.
Yeah.
And the dinner was going very well until they started talking about technology. And so on my way back to my hotel, I thought, Gary, the world's passed you by, mate.
Right.
Now's the time to give it away.
Yeah.
So that was in, I think, June, July. In August, I went on an overseas holiday with my wife and some other friends. I came back and said, that's it.
Yeah. What year was that?
That was 2011.
Right.
So I retired in January 2000. I left the CIO role in 2012, early 2012. Yeah. So I gave the university sort of 5 or 6 months' notice to find somebody else.
Yeah.
So it's been good. 40 odd years.
Yeah.
Well, 40, whatever it is. You add them up. It's a long time, but very enjoyable and very interesting.
Yeah. What would you say the highlights were of that period?
In terms of jobs, I think the best job that I had, well, it depends how you measure it, I guess. In terms of personal accomplishments, I think the role when I was directing the first major outsourcing here in WA at the Water Corporation. I started working for a company called Ferntree as a Melbourne-based thing. They won this big outsourcing contract for the Water Corporation. Ferntree were taken over by General Electric, and then General Electric sold out to Computer Science Australia. So I left when it was part of the GE family, but I did that for 4 years, and I think in terms of accomplishment and enjoyment, that was probably
right.
what I enjoyed. In terms of outcomes, probably my first management job, which was a government agency called Health Computing Services.
Right.
Back through the late 70s, we implemented the first online hospital systems here in WA.
Oh, okay, right.
So in terms of that sort of achievement, that was probably the biggest achievement. In the days when we were using control data, batch operating systems to do online work, so we had the 5 major what they were then called teaching hospitals in WA linked up. So we implemented the first laboratory system, the first patient master index, the first admissions, transfers, separations. So all of those were sort of generation 1 in the hospital system. So in terms of change in achievement, that's probably the best, the one that I would highlight. The rest of it tended to be just slogging away doing normal stuff, putting in systems, some of no great consequence.
Sure. That, the joys of project management. Yeah. So let's move on to ACS. How did you get involved with ACS?
Well, ACS is interesting. At the time, I was the IT manager of the Public Works Department. Public Works Department no longer exists. They corporate planned themselves out of existence, which was good. But at the time, there was a fellow who was heading up a consultancy group who happened to be the branch chairman at the time. And I forget his name, Gary something. Anyway, it doesn't matter. And he called on me, a marketing call, if you like, and we were chatting, and he said, "Well, Gary, you should come and join the ACS." Going back, when I first, that was the ACS branch level. I just first joined the ACS back in the, probably about 73, 74.
Right.
I had a view then that ACS was going to be an organisation that you had to belong to if you wanted to have a career, in IT.
Right.
Like engineers, in whatever. And it was a utopian ideal that I held right through to the 90s. But more of that later, I guess. So that's how I first joined the ACS. Then it was in the early 80s, 81, 82 or something like that. I got this invitation to join. So I joined the branch, just as a branch, just somebody on the committee. And the treasurer then resigned, and so they invited me to become treasurer.
Right.
And so I said, well, that sounds like a good job, I'll do that. So I did that for many years. And also got involved in running the branch conferences through the 80s. In that time, I was also then invited to be one of the 2 branch councillors to the national council meetings, which they hold twice a year. I think because I was working for the government, they thought I could afford the time. So, so I got invited, got very interested in that, and so I held that all the way through the 80s. Stood for election as Vice President, I think in 1990, I think it was right. Mainly at the support of Victorian branch. Because Victorian branch in New South Wales were always at loggerheads, and they didn't want somebody from the New South Wales branch to get the role. So they didn't have anybody that they wanted to put up. So I got invited.
So you were the handy neutral.
I was put up.
Right.
And so I was successful. Mainly lobbying on my behalf by Victoria branch. So Vice President for 3 years, and then President in 94, 95, elected to the President's role. Once again, back in those days, the Computer Society was still, I think, trying to find an identity for itself. We'd moved on from being a computer club like it was in the 70s.
Right.
But we were still struggling with the pressure of membership and keeping and growing members versus professionalism and having tighter professional accreditation to get in. And so these things were playing out. In my time, I don't think we actually really resolved that. I had a view, not strongly held, but I had a view that it was better to be a small professional organisation than a larger semi-professional.
Right.
But it's not a view that I would sort of bet my life on. It was just how I felt.
Sure.
And we were struggling with those sorts of issues. At the time, ACS membership was around about 14,000, 16,000, but pretty static. We were having a lot of trouble growing it.
Yeah.
Whereas now, what is it, over 45,000?
48.
48,000 members, and growing.
Yeah.
I mean, I put in my notes over 40,000, and I thought I better check.
Yeah, no, that's all right.
So I did check before I came, and it was 47,000 something. So,
that's right. Yeah.
So I mean, that's how it's grown in the last 25 years. The interesting thing is, in the 93, 94, 95, we changed the constitution.
That's right. Yeah.
And I think I spent almost all of 94 fighting the New South Wales branch, who felt they hadn't been consulted enough.
Right.
And so the first year of my presidency was really a rearguard action that I got dropped into from the previous president.
Right. Who was the previous president?
Jeff Dover.
Right.
And it wasn't Jeff's fault. I mean, we had to change our constitution for similar reasons. We were incorporated in the ACT, they changed their legislation.
Yeah.
We had to change our constitution.
Yeah.
Those on the council at the time thought we had done adequate consultation. There were a few old guard in New South Wales from the old computer club days said, no, we haven't been consulted, and so all emotions of no confidence.
Right.
So it was and they had some well-respected older members who were no longer in the industry, but were there and had been from the very beginning. So that was my presidency. In the scheme of things, I think in that era, the president was more just a figurehead than anything else.
Yeah.
Certainly not as active as I see the recent presidents,
Yep.
who are much more hands-on and well, not hands-on in terms of management, hands-on in terms of appearance.
Yeah. Profile.
Profile and that.
Yeah.
Whereas we were, I think, my era in those, in the 90s, probably to the early 2000s, it was much just a figurehead type role.
Right.
But once again, very enjoyable. I wouldn't go back on any of those times. I wouldn't do it again. I noticed,
I can understand that.
Some of them come back for a second bite.
Yeah.
I wouldn't.
Yeah.
I wouldn't do that. So that's how I got into it. It was by invitation. I think I was lucky right through my career that I had employers who were willing to give me the time.
Right.
It was coincidental that when I was president, and bear in mind I'm the first and only WA president.
Oh, okay. Right.
There was a president, Tony Benson, before me, but he was here as the branch manager of NCR.
Right.
And he went back to Sydney, so he's not classified as West Australian.
Okay. Yeah. Not a.
So,
yeah.
a subtle difference, but I'm the first and only WA president of the society. I doubt if under the new, not the current changes, but the changes that were made back earlier on, whether WA will ever get another president. Right. So it could be unique in that regard.
Right. Well,
we just don't have the profile over here.
Yeah.
But coming back, I've always had employers that saw the value in me participating, and always gave me the time off to do it. So, as I say, I think it was easier in those days than it is now. And currently I'm on the ACS disciplinary committee.
Right.
Unfortunately, I won't say we've never met, because we have had a couple of phone hookups, particularly during the COVID time.
Right.
But I've never been called on to act.
Okay.
Which is a good thing. Which is a good thing.
It is, yeah.
Which is a good thing. So, so I'm still, every now and again, the branch brings me out of the cupboard and I dust off my suit and my ACS tie and
Right.
do something, but it's getting rarer and rarer.
Yeah. So you're saying about your utopian view of the industry in the 90s. Do you want to expand a bit on that?
Well, I always felt, and once again, where it changed was when personal computing came along.
Right.
You know, prior to that, everything was mainframe or a mid-range or whatever, and was out of sight, and you had to know what you were doing.
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, and so I had this view. Probably started in the 70s when I started on these health systems. That if you wanted to be employed in building these sorts of systems, you should have some sort of qualification, accreditation with somebody to say you're capable of doing the things that needed to be done properly, you know, with quality. And as I kept saying to people, you can't be a hairdresser unless you're licensed.
Sure.
But so why should you be able to build huge systems for hospitals, patient care, laboratory systems, without some sort of formal qualification or accreditation?
Yeah.
And that's where the utopian view came from. Where it changed, two things made the change. One was the obvious intrusion, if you like, of personal computers.
Yeah.
I remember one company I was working for had a license to sell a project management software package, mainframe based.
Right.
IBM, big IBM mainframe based. And the company took that on as the local rep. Within 6 months, Microsoft had brought out Project Manager, which is running on a PC.
Yeah,
and it was better functionality than the big main. So I mean, that's suddenly you didn't need. People say, I can get on the Excel spreadsheet. I can do this. I can write basic programs, and that's when it all started to collapse.
Yeah.
The other influencing factor at the time in the 90s, the work environment was changing, where qualifications were no longer such a priority in employment. The criteria became: is the qualification, like a university degree, a requirement to do the job?
Right.
And people could say, well, I don't need it because I'm only running in PCs. I don't need that.
Yeah.
And so it was very hard to get people to accept ACS membership as a requirement for a job.
Sure.
You could say ACS membership preferred, but you couldn't say it's a requirement. So that the whole HR movement was moving against that. So specifically, you could only ask for a requirement like that, whereas almost if it was a legal-based thing. So like an engineer still required it because you had to certify buildings and that sort of stuff. IT, the link wasn't there.
Yeah, sure.
So my utopian view was slowly dissolved in the face of the changing computer environment and the change in work practices and human resource management, if you like.
Yeah.
But having said that, I think it's never going to go back to my utopian view, but I think there is an opportunity for the ACS to be picking up on things like privacy, security, particularly artificial intelligence, to say, maybe we need to go back a couple of steps backwards to say, if you want to get involved in some of these things like integrity, like security, anti-hacking, then there is a need, for some level of certification.
Yeah.
Now, good luck to the people that want to try it. They have my support, but I'm not too sure whether anyone's got the energy to push that.
Yeah.
And having said that, ACS also now has a much better profile with its membership than we did. When I was president, we could get to see the opposition.
Right.
But the government really was never interested. And as soon as the opposition became the government, they lost interest.
Right, yes.
So, whereas now, a different story with 47,000 members, where the ACS is a much better place to be listened to and be at the table for some of those things.
Yeah.
So the world has changed. And I've seen it change from the outside and from the inside a bit.
Yeah.
So that's I guess one of my views of where the ACS potentially has a role Well, a bigger role. I think
Yeah, sure.
They're doing that now. So, the future of the ICT community in ACS. Look, the future of IT is, I don't know where it is. I really
sure.
don't. In my years, it changes almost on a daily basis.
Yeah.
I'm reading a book at the moment about predictions and future and how you predict the future. And I look at it and I think the way IT changes so quickly, it'd be a brave man who said this is what's going to happen.
Sure.
When PCs came along, I forget who it was, I think somebody from Digital Equipment Corporation said, why would somebody want to have a computer on their desk?
Yeah.
The IBM fell in the 1950s. There's a market maybe for 5 computers.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you go back to some of these crazy statements. Chauffeurs will never sell many cars because there aren't enough people to be chauffeurs.
Yeah.
Telephones, your telephone will never take off in your house because there will never be enough people, women to man the switchboards.
Yeah.
All these crazy statements. So it'd be a brave man who said, this is what I think is going to happen.
Yeah.
And you just have to go with the punches, I think, and be open-minded.
Yeah.
You've got to accept that it's going to change, and you've got to be prepared to get on with it, if you like. Which I think, my era in IT, which we had to do.
Sure.
Because it was just changing so rapidly. I can remember one time as a manager, we were looking, this would be the early 80s, looking up to set a network. The Public Works Department at the time had control over the country water supply, so we had water supply from Kununurra to Esperance and in places in between. We're trying to set up a decentralised network, and of course all you had, the fastest you could have was a 4800 baud dial-up line basically. But you could multi-drop it as long as you didn't have too many people on at the same time.
Yeah.
So we went out for an expression of interest to say, how would you handle this problem? And of course everybody came back with their view of the world based on their technology.
Sure.
So we selected one as a trial. By the time we got around putting the trial, the world had moved on. Telstra had come out with faster networks and more comprehensive networks. People have got new technology. And so you sort of say, well, do I stop and go back, knowing full well that if you go through it again, it'll just keep leapfrogging you all the time. So you try and pick. And that happens now. I think probably not as dramatically as it was doing through the 80s and 90s. But certainly I think, so predicting the future of ICT and the community, I don't know.
Yeah. So what would be your advice to somebody who is looking at entering the industry today?
From where bearing in mind I've been retired for more than 10 years.
Yeah.
If I look back at my last job, one of the things that I've been in mentoring people that work for me is to say you really need to think where you want your career to go. Do you want to be a technical specialist? Do you want to get into management? Where do you see your future in terms of the skills you have?
Yeah.
So, for example, I realised that my technical skills were never going to be very good. I was too impatient to be a good, in those days, programmer or then, technically in database. I just didn't have the patience or the interest, if you like.
Right.
So management was my skill. So I went off and got a degree in organisation and business management with a background in accounting, so that I could talk to the accountants and the managers and understood the human resource implications of what we were doing. It was pre-MBA days, so now I would go and say, go do your MBA.
Right.
So I got a Bachelor of Commerce to back that up, and that's what I say to all the people. If you want to get into management, go and do your MBA, or go and get a degree in something that is going to enhance what you're doing.
Yeah.
With the technical people, you really have to think if you're going to be a technical specialist, and there's plenty of growth and promotion and roles, even up back into IT management through a separate route. I mean, you don't exclude yourself from IT management.
Sure.
But make sure your skills are relevant. Don't get locked into a technology that's dying fast.
Right.
Make sure you are aware of where technology is going. Keep your skills up to date. Go on your professional development. Because if you don't, you'll get left behind very quickly.
Yeah.
And so it really is a question of making sure your skills are maintained, they're relevant, and there is a market for your skills.
Yeah.
I forget, it was the IBM System 3, I think it was. It had some very smart people, but it disappeared out the back door.
Right.
So they're left with these great skills, but nobody to employ them or use them.
Sure.
You've got to know when you've got to move with the technology.
Yeah.
If you're going into management, I think you also need to maintain a very high level of understanding of the technology without knowing the skills. So I went off to things like Cisco conferences and stuff like that, just to find out what was going, and also to make sure that the technical people couldn't pull the wool over your eyes.
Yes.
So you could at least talk to them sensibly.
Yeah.
And I think from a management viewpoint, you've got to do that.
Yeah.
So if you're getting the management thing, make sure you don't just dump your technology. Keep abreast of it.
Yeah.
Understand it. Go to the conferences. Do your professional development.
Yeah. Know those acronyms and buzzwords and.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah.
And know what's happening down to. One of the big things about ICT management, because it's moving so fast, or the environment's moving so fast, you really need to be aware of what the next wave is. You might not want to implement it tomorrow, but you've got to know what it is, and you've got to be looking at it and understanding how it might fit your environment.
Right.
When I left ECU, the big thing was outsourcing your data management, your data to an outsourced platform. And from a university perspective, it had a few downsides. We outsourced our student email system with a lot of caveats around it. We were reluctant to use our staff email system to outsource that, simply because of things like privacy and security. You had researchers sending pre-publication PhD theses. Well, you don't want somebody to hack that and get hold of it.
Yeah, sure.
We had constraints over the American Patriot Act as to where servers were placed. So we said, well, they've got to be in Australia. They're not allowed to be in the US. They're not allowed to be anywhere where the US is, has power.
Yeah.
And I think at the time Singapore was one of the few other places that we knew would stand up to the US government if they tried to take our servers.
Yeah.
So things like that, you've got to be aware of that.
Sure.
In IT, in a management, you've got to stay ahead of that game. Reluctantly, from ECU's perspective, I also went off to conferences in the US every 18 months to 2 years to find out what was going on in these spaces.
Yeah, sure.
So it's a constant, and it has always been a constant learning.
Yeah.
And I think, that's where I think the ACS has done well over the years, and even going back to the 70s when I was running conferences, that was where this information was disseminated. We'd have a consulting group would get into an organisation, one in particular, and they did the strategic information systems plan. Nobody ever done that before, and so I got the consulting firm and the client to put on a presentation.
Right.
And suddenly, all these organisations are now doing a strategic information systems plan.
Yeah.
So that's where ACS had a role in the 70s and right through the national conferences, all the same. Now we do it, the ACS does it more selectively through its professional development seminars and stuff, but the same I guess way of people learning and keeping abreast, which is good.
Yeah. It's interesting you mentioned the conferences, because in these interviews I've been doing with fellows, there's been a constant reference to those over the 70s and 80s of, in many cases, how people got involved with ACS in the first place.
It was the only, that and vendor courses,
Yeah.
Which you paid a lot of money for.
That's right.
And they're very specific.
Yeah.
To their product.
Absolutely.
Which is fine if it was Oracle or whatever you did it, but there were no sort of expanded generalist conference type stuff. I think the ACS played a very important part, right through 70s and 80s with their national conferences. We held a national conference here in '89. I was treasurer for the '89 conference.
Yep.
And that was when the airline strike was on.
Right.
Yep. You remember
the pilot strike.
The pilot strike.
Yeah.
So we struggled to get people from the East Coast, but we still had a very profitable conference.
Yeah.
Very successful conference.
Yeah.
Well attended, and people made the effort. We had people flew from Melbourne to Bali and back again.
Right. Yes.
This sort of thing. So it was interesting challenge. And the morning of the opening morning of the conference, I rocked up, and we'd employed a conference organizer to help us, and the company had gone bankrupt that morning. So the Crown Centre out here, we were going to cancel the conference on us. Because where's our money?
Yeah.
Fortunately, as treasurer, I'd kept hold of the money.
Yeah.
So we could write the cheque
and pay them directly.
Without going through the conference organiser. So the conference went ahead successfully, and then I had to deal with the administrators of this company afterwards. And accountants.
Yeah.
In there aren't nice people. I can tell you.
Well, particularly
we had lots of harsh and robust discussions.
Yeah.
But we came out of it well.
Yeah. No, that's a good story. That the pilot strike and the event organizer going.
Well, we managed to. I think John Goddard from New South Wales, I think he's now deceased, was president at the time, and he and a couple of others managed to get a lift on a Air Force Hercules or something.
Right.
So
a noisy trip.
Yeah. So we managed to get all the important people there, and lots. As I say, it was financially successful.
Yeah.
It was good times.
Yeah. So, as closing, anything general that you'd like to add?
Look, I think the thing that I would say to young people getting in is make sure you have a work-life balance. I think for me, the Computer Society was something that was parallel to my career, which gave me another interest, apart from a parallel interest.
Yeah.
So apart from my outside work life and sport and that sort of thing, I think the ACS was excellent for me in keeping a good work-life balance.
Right.
And people that I've seen that spend all their time working, it's not good. It's not good. So that's my advice. Enjoy it.
Yeah.
But as I said at the very beginning, I mean, the world is so different now to when I started with punch cards and batch systems and that sort of, and seen it grow. I remember giving a talk once. I think it was at the Adelaide branch conference. It would have been in the 90s. Talking then about how technologies are converging.
Yeah.
And that has just accelerated. I mean, there's now hard to differentiate between networking and computers and data storage and outsourcing. So it is now all of these things have come together.
Yeah.
And that acceleration. I mean, and it brings its complications. It brings its complications. My wife wears one of these Apple Watches, and it's caused great havoc between her phone and my phone.
Right.
Because the setting, and I can't understand the settings that need to be done, but now she knows who I'm calling. I know who she's calling.
Right.
I can call her on her phone and things.
Yeah. So
it's a nuisance that I'm unable to resolve. So look, the ACS in particular has been good for me over the years. My career, people often say, if you went back to uni now, where there are career counsellors and would you do anything different? My answer is, at the time, I probably would have. I don't know that I would have done pure mathematics.
Sure.
That was a good time at university for 3 years, but a fairly useless degree.
Right. Yeah.
But would I would still have wanted to do IT.
Yeah.
Okay. Now I look at some of my friends that did the program in training, the Commonwealth PIT course. You know, they were accountants,
Right.
Bachelor of Arts, all sorts of things.
Yeah.
But passed the IQ tests and passed all the other stuff. Who went on and were successful in their endeavours.
Yeah.
Across a whole range of industries. So yes, I don't think I would change my career, but I might have changed my 3 years at uni.
Right.
So
Yeah.
we'll come out with the same outcome, hopefully.
Yeah. No, well, I really appreciate your time today.
It's been good. It's been interesting.
Yeah, thank you very much for taking some time out to participate. Yeah. Thank you, Gary.
Good.